Good afternoon. Welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Diana Otero. I am the Product Engagement Manager at Bloomerang, and you might recognize me from attending our Bloomerang Academy classes or listening to our release and help videos. Today, we're talking about Bloomerang plus Zapier integrations for your favorite apps. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Jessie Gilchrist. Jessie is a Zapier certified expert and Bloomerang integrations consultant at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is a Bloomerang partner specializing in system automations for Bloomerang. Sidekick Solutions has been a Bloomerang user since 2013 and most recently was part of the Bloomerang team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app, which is the focus of today's webinar. We're so excited to have Jessie here today to share her expertise and explore the Bloomerang Zapier app with you. Hi, Jessie.
Hi, Diana. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It is great to be here. We love partnering with Bloomerang on these Academy webinars. If you've attended any of our Bloomerang integration webinars before, some of this information may be a good refresher for you, but if you are brand new to Bloomerang and how integrations can be set up with Zapier, this is going to be a great webinar and session today. So in planning this webinar, Diana and I brainstormed how to best approach the topic of integrations. As you can probably imagine, it's a really big topic. In today's session, our goal is really to offer you actionable tips and best practices that you can apply to your Bloomerang database right away to assist with and improve your fundraising efforts. So if we surveyed the group, we would likely find that in addition to Bloomerang, most of you are already using other softwares to support your fundraising strategy. So you're likely using other tools for email marketing, event coordination, volunteer management, accounting, peer-to-peer fundraising. The list really can go on, and the items or categories listed here is not a comprehensive list. So today, what we really want to show you is how Bloomerang integrations and workflow automation can streamline processes, save time, and reduce effort among and between the software that you are already using at your organization. The more we can lean on technology to streamline the busy work of our day-to-day operations, the more time we can spend engaging constituents, decreasing attrition, and cultivating passion for our causes. Now, this is even more relevant today as most of us have moved away from working in person with constituents and are doing remote work. And whether this is virtual collaboration with your constituents or even among our own teams, automation can help drive that process. So for our webinar today, we are going to start by introducing Zapier. We're going to talk about how it works and why Zapier integrations with Bloomerang are a key feature of your Bloomerang system and your fundraising strategy. We're going to explore popular Zapier-enabled integrations between Bloomerang and other tools like Eventbrite, PayPal, and G Suite. And then we're going to wrap up our session today talking through some key details on how to get started with Zapier-enabled integrations for Bloomerang. So let's go ahead and dive on in. So first off, we want to do a quick poll to see how many of you have heard of Zapier before, or if you are brand new to Zapier.
Thanks, Jessie, and thanks, everyone. It looks like a majority of the attendees we have today have heard of Zapier, but have not used it.
Perfect. Fantastic. So let's start by then just talking about what is Zapier, kind of the most basic question. So Zapier itself is automation software. Zapier sits between your Bloomerang database and other applications you're using, helping them talk to each other. So it's the middleware that enables many integrations with Bloomerang, expanding your fundraising opportunities. So I like to think of it this way, that every software has its own language, and Zapier serves as our translator. So it allows us to not only pass text or pass data from one software to the other, but it also helps us in translating that data because each software talks in its own way. So in this capacity, the development of Bloomerang's Zapier app enables integration with over 2,000 other apps in Zapier's directory. So Zapier is essentially throwing an integration party. Since they're hosting the party, those that join the party have to follow some basic rules, and we'll cover those more in a bit. But once you're in the party, you can connect to any other apps that are at the party. It's actually a really neat concept and makes integrations for your Bloomerang database highly accessible. So Zapier is a builder that allows you to design integrations using steps. And Zapier integrations are like Lego blocks, where each block is a task in the integration workflow. A single integration workflow is called a Zap, and Zaps start with a trigger and then proceed to complete one or many actions. So let's look at this in practice with a simple Zap. So let's say I want to notify my team in a Slack channel when a constituent in Bloomerang has a transaction greater than $1,000. So if I hop over to my Zap here in Zapier, you can see that my trigger is a new transaction in Bloomerang. So when I create that new transaction in Bloomerang, and based off of the filters and criteria I've set up in this step, when I enter a new transaction in Bloomerang that's over $1,000, this Zap will run. And once that Zap begins running, it'll send a channel message in Slack for each transaction that meets my criteria. So Zaps are linear, flowing from top to bottom based on the initial trigger and then a subsequent set of actions. So the output from that workflow I just showed would look like this. Our Slack message merges data from the Bloomerang transaction and includes a link so that my team can quickly navigate to that transaction in Bloomerang. This is a really great workflow if you would like to notify board members or other team members when there are donations above a certain threshold. So Zaps can be simple like this example, but they can also expand to include multiple steps, multiple apps. Zaps can use filters, paths, and conditional logic. And Zaps can also be used for data transformation and formatting. So as I was talking about, it can serve as kind of that translator between apps that use different language. And so we often get asked, why get excited about Bloomerang and Zapier? Well, there's three primary reasons. First and foremost, Zapier connects to 2,000 other applications. Any app in Zapier's directory can be connected to Bloomerang. And within the directory, you'll find a long list of apps that you likely use every day. If it's on Zapier's list, it can be integrated with Bloomerang. The second reason we get excited about connecting Bloomerang with Zapier is that Zapier was designed for anyone to build integrations. You don't need to know how to code to build Zaps. Anyone can build and maintain a Zap. And then the last piece of why connecting Bloomerang with Zapier is such an advantage is that Zapier lets users design their own integrations. You aren't limited to a one-size-fits-all workflow, mapping, or formatting. You truly can build the integration that is perfect for you and for your organization. So how do we get started? First thing we need is we need a Zapier account, and then we need to link Bloomerang to Zapier. And this process is really easy to do. So if I hop over here, if I go to zapier.com/home to sign up for a Zapier account, it's as easy as clicking the sign up button. You can sign up for a free trial. It's usually about 14 days. And then you also can apply for a nonprofit discount. So Zapier does a great job providing discounts for nonprofit organizations. So once you convert from a free trial to a paid plan, make sure to apply for that discount. Now, once you have a Zapier account, you want to connect Bloomerang to your Zapier. So once you're logged in, you'll go to the My Apps page. And you'll see I already have a Bloomerang account connected here, but I can show you how to connect another one. So you go to the My App screen and we will just type Bloomerang and select Bloomerang from the search bar. Now, once I select Bloomerang, it's going to open a window that'll prompt me to enter my username and password for Bloomerang, and then I'll click Grant Access, and that will connect my Bloomerang database to Zapier. So a very simple process to sign up for Zapier and then connect your Bloomerang account so that you can begin building Zaps and automating your workflows. Now let's talk a little bit about what we can do with Bloomerang and Zapier. With the Bloomerang Zapier app, we can build integrations with data flowing out of Bloomerang and also build integrations with data flowing into Bloomerang. And so the flexibility to build integrations that flow in each direction, both in and out of Bloomerang, allows us to support any part of an organization's fundraising strategy. Now, as a reminder, each step in a Bloomerang Zap is going to be based on a trigger, an action, or even a search. So let's go through each one of the triggers, actions, and searches that are available in the Bloomerang Zapier app and that you can use to build your own automations. So let's start at the beginning of the Zap workflow, which is talking about triggers. So a trigger is an event in Bloomerang. And when the event happens, the trigger starts a Zap. Each trigger event starts a Zap to run and complete a subsequent set of actions. So if I enter 3 new constituents in Bloomerang and I use the new constituent trigger, my Zap will run 3 times, once for each new constituent. The time it takes for a trigger to run in Zapier based on an event in Bloomerang will depend on your Zapier plan. But generally, your Zap will trigger to run in less than 15 minutes from the time of the event in Bloomerang. So integrations from Bloomerang can start a Zap or trigger a Zap based on the following Bloomerang events: a new constituent, an updated constituent, a new transaction, or a new transaction payment. So let's go ahead and walk through each one of these. So new constituent is pretty straightforward. It's going to trigger a Zap to run when you create a new constituent in Bloomerang and save it. So from our Bloomerang database, if we create a new constituent, whether it's an organization or an individual, when we enter all of the information that's desired for that new constituent record and click save, that will trigger our Zap to run. Now in Zapier, we have some options for the trigger. So we can choose whether we want to trigger our integration when it's an individual constituent that's created or an organization. Now we can also leave this type field blank, which will allow our Zap to trigger for both individuals and organizations. So the next trigger is updated constituent, and this works similarly to new constituent. The Zap will be triggered to run when you update an existing constituent and you save it. So if we go back to Bloomerang, and let me open a constituent record here. The updated constituent trigger will run if any of the information on the constituent's profile is edited. So this could be their basic information, contact information, contact preferences, any custom fields, essentially any change to that constituent's profile in Bloomerang is going to trigger the updated constituent workflow to run. Now, when we look at this trigger here in Zapier, let's switch from a new constituent to an updated constituent. And I'm going to go ahead and select my Bloomerang account that I've linked. You can see that similar to triggering on a new constituent, I can identify whether I want to trigger for both individuals and organizations that are updated, or just one of those constituent types. We can also set this trigger to bring in additional data for the constituent's giving summary or giving history, which includes the constituent's 10-year giving history, average giving, lifetime giving, and first, last, and largest transactions. So if we wanted to include that information for mapping in a subsequent step or action in our workflow, we could set this field to true. There's also the option to include the constituent's household information. So these additional data pools allow more capability when building Zaps. Now you can leave them blank, which defaults them to false, or you can actually set them to false, which does not include the information. But if the data would be helpful in the subsequent steps in your workflow, go ahead and set those to true to pull that additional information in for that updated constituent. The next trigger we're going to talk about is new transaction. So the new transaction trigger will trigger a Zap to run when you create a transaction and save it. So in Bloomerang, I'm going to hop back over to Bloomerang here. This could be whether we are creating a donation, a pledge, or a recurring donation, or a payment towards a pledge or recurring donation could trigger the new transaction to run. So depending on the settings in our Zap, let's go ahead and update our trigger, switch it from updated constituent now to new transaction. And this allows us with some filter options as well, or additional criteria we can use. So first off is we can limit the types of transactions that are going to trigger our workflow. So we could set it just to donations, recurring donation payments, and pledge payments. Or if we leave this blank, it'll trigger for all of these transaction types. We can also set a minimum and a maximum amount. And like the updated constituent trigger, we can choose to bring in the constituent's giving history or their household information. Now, similar to the new transaction trigger is the new transaction payment trigger. So the new transaction payment will trigger a Zap to run when you create a new transaction and save it, but only for donations, pledge payments, and recurring donation payments. It will not trigger for creation of a recurring donation schedule or a pledge. So unlike the new transaction trigger, which will trigger to run once a transaction is created, the new transaction payment will trigger a Zap to run for each payment on a newly created transaction. So you would want to use this trigger instead of the new transaction trigger when you need to run a Zap for each payment individually when a transaction has multiple split payments. So let's take an example of the difference between new transaction and new transaction payment. So if I were to enter a donation of $20 and there was only one payment, it was a single donation, each trigger would run once. The new transaction trigger would run once, or the new transaction payment trigger would run once. If I were to enter a donation for $20 with two split payments, the new transaction would still only run once, but the new transaction payment would trigger twice, once for each payment. And if it was the same $20 donation, but with three split payments, we would get that same single trigger if we were using new transaction, versus we could have three separate triggers for using the new transaction payment. So now that we've talked about the events in Bloomerang that could trigger a workflow to start or trigger a Zap to start, let's talk about the actions available in the Bloomerang Zapier app. And so these are the actions if we are flowing data into Bloomerang that we could take. So an action is an event a Zap performs after it is triggered. An action is a task, and you can think of it like this. If you were to complete the steps of the Zap manually, each step in the Zap would be a task that you'd be required to do. So Zapier is just automating that process by completing those same manual steps in an automated way. And each task is an action completed by Zapier. And so generally speaking, when we are talking about actions, we are talking about writing data into Bloomerang. And so there's 4 options that are available to us. So integrations that are writing data to Bloomerang can run based on the following Bloomerang actions. We can create a constituent, update a constituent, create a donation, or create an interaction. So when we talk about creating a constituent, it's as straightforward as it sounds. The create constituent action will create a new constituent record in Bloomerang. So if we hop over here to Zapier, let's take a look at the create constituent action. So the create constituent action requires that we select a constituent type of either individual or organization. And you can see that Zapier, does flag here for you which fields are required. And the required fields do change based off of whether you've selected an organization or an individual. Same as when you are making that selection within Bloomerang when you're creating an account. So these fields in the create constituent action line up with the fields that you'd see when you're entering a new constituent in Bloomerang. So you can see that we have our name fields. We have our other standard fields as well as communication fields like primary address, phone, and email. And then we also have any custom fields that we have set up for constituents in Bloomerang. And so these fields mirror the fields that you would see when you are creating a new individual or organization constituent in Bloomerang. Now, the next action that's available is to create a donation. So the create donation action creates a new donation record for a specific constituent. And so it does have the ability to create single donations or donations with split payments. Now, we're not going to talk too much about split payments with the create donation action today, as that has some advanced functionality. But in thinking about what the use cases might be for a create donation with split payments, if you're running an e-commerce store like Shopify or WooCommerce, you can write a donation to Bloomerang where each item in the order or purchase is a separate split on that total donation. So there's a great use case if you are using some type of an e-commerce store for tapping into that advanced functionality of the create donation action. But today we're going to focus on using this action for creation of a single donation. So if we look at the create donation action for Bloomerang, you can see that we have the ability to write the donation to a specific constituent based on the ID for that constituent. Fields like date, method, amount, fund campaign, and appeal, and custom fields are all available for mapping, just as you would enter data in the Bloomerang database if you were manually entering a donation. And these fields will relate to your Bloomerang instance. So if you click the drop down for fund, you will see the funds available in your Bloomerang database. Now, when we look at the Zapier action for create donation, you'll notice that at the top we're appending the constituent record. So we're identifying which constituent the donation should be created for. We can't create a donation in Bloomerang without first identifying who the constituent is that it should be added to. So you'll see the ability to set up custom mapping where we could then map in the constituent's ID. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit more here when we look at our templates for Eventbrite and PayPal. But for now, just know that when you are creating that donation, we are appending this donation to a specific constituent. So the create interaction action creates a new interaction record for a specific constituent. And the goal here is to create a non-financial activity on a constituent's timeline. And the configuration is very similar to creating a donation. So if we go to my create interaction, Bloomerang action in Zapier, scroll down here, you can see the setup is very similar to the create donation in that we are identifying the constituent whom the interaction should be created for. And then we have our standard interaction fields like date, subject, purpose, channel. And then we also have access to the custom fields we have set up for interactions in our Bloomerang instance as well. Now, the last action that's available is to update a constituent. So update constituent updates the constituent's name, contact information, or even custom fields for a specific constituent. Now, it's important to note that this action can overwrite data of existing constituents, so it's important to be careful and intentional when using it. If we're writing a new address, phone, or email to an existing Bloomerang constituent, it'll promote that new address, phone, or email to the primary, but will not remove the previous address, phone, or email data. Instead, it will demote that down to a secondary field set or a secondary address, phone, or email as needed. Now, when we look at the updated or update constituent action in Bloomerang, or for Bloomerang, it's an important thing to note that along with creating a donation and creating an action, you'll need to append a constituent ID to update the appropriate constituent. So you can see right here, when I was setting this up, I happened to select one of my constituents. Again, we'll talk about here in a few minutes how we can map the constituent ID into here so that this workflow runs dynamically based off of the constituent that triggers the workflow, so that it really works in kind of that scalable capacity. Now, it's important to note as well that when we are talking about the update constituent action in Bloomerang, that any fields left blank essentially are ignored. They don't remove any data from Bloomerang. So if I don't map a first name into my update constituent action, it's not going to remove the first name from that constituent's profile. It simply treats it as if there's no update that is being requested or that it should be made to that account. And by leaving that field blank, it's not overriding or nullifying existing data in Bloomerang. So now that we've talked about the constituent ID that's needed to populate which constituent we want to update or create a donation or interaction for, you might be wondering how we find that constituent ID. And that's a great question. We can get the constituent ID by using a search. The Bloomerang Zapier app also includes a search step, which is essential to every Zap that creates donations, interactions, or updates a constituent. The Find Constituent search completes a search for existing constituent records based on the constituent's name and contact information as a duplicate check. Optionally, if a matching constituent isn't found, that Find Constituent search can also be modified to create a new constituent record. Now let's go ahead and show what this looks like in Zapier. So if I pop back over here, I'm going to pull my Find Constituent step, and you can see our action event is Find Constituent. Now, when you're doing the search, the first piece is that you'll need to identify if you are searching for an individual or an organization, and then map in the required fields. So at a minimum, we need name and one piece of contact information for that constituent. Now, we recommend that you include as much information about the constituent as is available from the previous steps in the Zap or the trigger itself. Adding multiple pieces of information will conduct a broad search for an existing constituent record. And Bloomerang then makes a search based on the data you've submitted. So optionally, if Bloomerang does not find an existing account, you can create one by checking this Create Bloomerang Constituent if it doesn't exist yet. And then map in the applicable fields from either your trigger step or prior actions to populate the data that would create that new constituent account. Now, the output of this find or create constituent search is the constituent ID that we can use in later steps to identify which constituent should have a donation interaction added to its timeline or that should be updated. Now, I know we went through those pretty quickly, and the goal is to get you some understanding and terminology about Zaps, triggers, actions, and searches so that we can now dive into some templates. But before we do want to emphasize that any app that is in the Zapier directory can be integrated with Bloomerang. And there's over 2,000 apps in Zapier's directory. So to search that directory, you can go to zapier.com/apps to search for available apps. And Diana actually already shared that URL in the chat as well. So if you want to click into that really easily, it's linked right there in the chat window. Now, when we think about automation, we think about apps, but we also think about use cases. While we may want to integrate PayPal or Eventbrite, we may also want to think about other automations that are not app specific. For example, with Zapier, we can do a number of additional use cases to support your fundraising efforts. This could include sending follow-up emails to teammates, notifying board members of major gifts, setting a calendar events for to-dos, running real-time dashboards in a spreadsheet, publishing giving data on your website. You can also automate acknowledgement printing, log surveys and forms to interactions, send new donor welcome series, process gifts with card swipers, or sync constituents to your email contacts. As you can see, there's a full spectrum of ways that automation and integration with Bloomerang can support your fundraising strategy, but also your internal operating procedures. So let's go ahead and take a minute to think about and get a little bit of feedback on which automations you feel like you would find most helpful. So Diana's gone ahead and launched a poll. Let us know. You can select as many as apply. Which automations you would find most helpful. We have Eventbrite, PayPal, G Suite, Office 365, MailChimp, or if you select other, please specify in the chat what other types of automations you would find most helpful for your organization.
Thanks, Jessie. And while we have these automations up, if you're interested, this is the first in our Zapier series of webinars. So we do have upcoming webinars that talk a little bit more about these automations with Eventbrite, with MailChimp, with Google Sheets coming up. So keep an eye out for that. It looks like about 44% of our attendees today are interested in G Suite, followed closely by PayPal, Office 365, and MailChimp are all equal, and lastly, Eventbrite.
Perfect, great. And I see quite a few coming through the chat. Looks like we have a QGive and QuickBooks, Cognito, Airtable, Constant Contact, GiveButter. So great. Looks like there's a lot of wheels spinning and ideas turning about different ways that you can automate workflows between Bloomerang and the other applications that your organization is using. So we understand that a lot of the information we've been talking about so far likely feels exciting and probably a little intimidating at the same time. So to help you get into Zapier quickly, Bloomerang and Diana's team have developed a number of what we call Zap templates that you can use. And so we're going to look at a few of those templates next. But to find those templates, let's go ahead and take a look at where those live, because I want to make it easy for you to be able to then go and find the templates that we're going to walk through. So let me go to my other page here. Okay. So if I go to Zapier's, we're going to go to Zapier's directory, so zapier.com/apps. And from that Zapier directly, I'm actually going to type in Bloomerang. So if I select Bloomerang, the way to get to the pre-built templates that are available for Bloomerang and other common applications is to scroll down, and you'll see right here where it says connect Bloomerang to 2,000 plus other apps. And all of these different workflows down here are different templates that Bloomerang has created with common platforms that their users are using. Now, you are not limited to these templates. You can absolutely build integrations between Bloomerang and other software, but these templates are a great place to get started. And this is where you'll find the templates that we are going to showcase here and the use cases we're about to go through. So to launch a template in your Zapier account, you'd identify the one you want to launch, click learn more, and then click try it, and it'll copy that Zap into your Zapier account. So then you can go ahead and start building and customizing that to meet your needs. So before we dive into the actual templates for Eventbrite, PayPal, and G Suite, let's take a minute and just take a couple of questions. Diana, have we had any questions come through? Or if you have questions right now, please feel free to enter those in the Q&A panel.
Thanks, Jessie. So far, the questions we've had seem to be looking at whether the apps that people are using are on Zapier. So you can check that if you go to Zapier. Simply search for the app that you use, and if it's there, that means you can connect your Bloomerang database with that application through Zapier.
Perfect. Well, let's go ahead and dive right into the templates then. We'll have more time for Q&A as we go through here, and then also at the end. So if questions come up, please feel free to keep submitting those. So as I mentioned, Bloomerang has developed Zap templates, and Diana actually just shared a URL to those templates in the chat window as well. So feel free to copy that down. So these are pre-built Zaps that require little effort to get up and running. And so we are going to showcase today Zap templates that are set up for Eventbrite, PayPal, and G Suite. So we recognize that most organizations are not hosting in-person events right now. So we went back and forth a little bit on whether we could cover Eventbrite, wanting to be sensitive to current events and the state of fundraising as it is today. But we decided to include Eventbrite for a few reasons. First, we are always and perpetually will be hopeful that in-person events can be held safely in the near future, because they are great ways to build community and engagement with your constituents, and especially with those constituents that are most passionate about your causes. And second, the reason why we continue to showcase this Eventbrite workflow is that Eventbrite can be used for virtual events. So it simplifies registration and check-in, whether those events are in person or virtual. So Zapier-enabled Eventbrite integration with Bloomerang makes event registrations and attendance a breeze. Instead of spreadsheets and paper forms, you can use automation to sync event data with your Bloomerang database, so you know who registered, who paid for tickets, and who attended the event. So Eventbrite offers 3 triggers in its Zapier connection, each of which starts one of the 3 workflow templates with Bloomerang. So we have a trigger for a new order in Eventbrite. We have a trigger for a new attendee registered, which can also include guests. And then we have a trigger for new attendee check-in, which is used to trigger based off of day of event attendance. So these triggers are what start the Zaps. What we are hoping to do is to sync this information into Bloomerang as constituents, donations, and interactions. So Zapier-enabled integration with Eventbrite generally includes 3 Zaps, each handled in real time based on a new entry or an event in Eventbrite. So the first Zap is to log the event order in Bloomerang. When an order is logged in Eventbrite, we want to find or create the constituent who is the purchaser in Bloomerang, and then create a donation on the purchaser's timeline for the Eventbrite order. So if I hop over to my Zap template, you can see here that I went ahead, just as I showed you, I went to the Bloomerang Zap templates and clicked try it under the create donations in Bloomerang when new orders are created in Eventbrite. So what I'm showing you here is exactly what you'll get when you deploy this template in Zapier. So up at the top here, we have a new order in Eventbrite as our trigger. And the template has placed a filter here to only continue if the ticket price is greater than a penny, or if the order is greater than a penny. And this is really important because this makes sure that we aren't creating donations in Bloomerang for free ticket registrations or free ticket orders. We only want to create that donation for orders from Eventbrite that are greater than a penny. Now, our next step, as we've talked about already, is to use that search to find or create the constituent in Bloomerang. And so you can see that this template goes ahead and maps in the first name and last name of the purchaser, as well as the purchaser's email for that search to try and locate a constituent account. And these fields are mapping from the new order trigger. And so building Zaps is a lot like a word merge, where you can click into the field, we can search any of our any of our previous steps to find the data we're looking for, and click the field that we want to map in. So you can see how easy it is to click those fields in, but the templates will come pre-populated with basic mapping. Now again, this template is set up to create, scrolled too far, to create a new constituent account in Bloomerang if one isn't found in that search. And so you can see that it goes ahead and maps the purchaser name into the corresponding name fields, and then also maps the email down here into the email field. Mouse, there we go. There's the email field. So maps that new primary email from that new order. And so once we found or created our constituent, the next step in the workflow and in this template is going to create the donation in Bloomerang. And so you can see that it's going ahead, and from that prior step where we found or created the constituent, the ID number is mapped in. And then all of the other details about that are pulled in. So we have the ID, the date, the method, and then we can pull in the amount. Actually, it's there we go. There we go. So we can pull in our amount and then set up the appropriate fund, campaign, and appeal that we want applied to that donation when it's created in Bloomerang, as well as any other custom fields that we want to flag information for. And so this information is going to map directly over to the creation of a donation in Bloomerang. So when that donation is created in Bloomerang, it's going to map the amount of that Eventbrite order, the fund, campaign, and appeal, and method that we've specified in our workflow, and any additional custom fields that we have set up to track additional information from that order. And again, if it didn't find an existing constituent in Bloomerang, it will have created a new one and populated all of the details for that constituent from the Eventbrite order into Bloomerang to create that new account. Now, the second Zap, that's a template for Bloomerang and Eventbrite, is to log a registration event for each individual who registered for the event. So the neat thing about Eventbrite is that there's a new attendee registered trigger that captures both the purchaser that registers for the event, as well as each individual guest they add onto the order. So if the purchaser ordered 3 tickets, 1 for themselves and 2 for guests, this trigger will trigger 3 times, which allows you to create a constituent record for guests and the primary purchaser, as well as log an interaction for the registration for each. So this is a big win for your fundraising efforts, as you'll be able to run Bloomerang reports on complete event rosters and continue soliciting event guests long after the completion of your event. Now let's go ahead and hop over and take a look at the new registration template. So this is very similar to what we saw when we were doing the event order. The difference is we don't have a filter because this workflow will trigger for both paid and free events. And then the Find or Create Constituent step operates exactly the same way as we just showcased when we are writing Eventbrite orders to Bloomerang. It's the Create Interaction step that has a little bit different flavor and where you may want to customize your interactions and even map custom fields to track event status. So for example, for the sandbox we have connected here, we have fields set up to track participation status, the name of the event, and the event type. Now, the reason why this is important and why custom fields may be an integral part of an Eventbrite integration is because the next Zap we're going to showcase is going to track attendance. And so having a status field where we can identify which interaction record is for a registration versus an attendance means that we can go ahead and report on those separately and even create reports in Bloomerang to show who registered for our event but did not attend. So if we hop over now and take a look at the one for new attendees, so this is for actual attendance, so it's a different trigger. It's a new attendee check-in versus a registration. You'll see we have the difference here for that participation status. Again, this is a custom field we've set up. But you can see that we're going to track this differently because we're going to say that this is a status of attended versus registered. So it allows us that for each constituent that registered, they'll have one interaction for their registration. And then if they attend, they will have another interaction in their timeline for that attendance, which makes it very easy to pull reports on both registration and attendance. So there are a lot of benefits for automating the entry of Eventbrite activity in Bloomerang. Number one, no more post-event imports. You can get constituents into Bloomerang for not only the primary purchaser, but for guests as well. You can use mobile apps for registration and check-in, and you can start reporting on registrations immediately in real time. Since the automation flows in near real time, you can pull updated registration reports in real time as well and see how participation or registration for your event is going. And then you can also manage paid and free events, all with Eventbrite in a single automation system through Zapier. But the power of Zapier-enabled integration doesn't stop there. By adding other apps to these existing templates, you can accomplish multiple operational tasks in a single workflow. And this is where Zapier becomes a big tool for any organization. In addition to the core Eventbrite setup, you could also tag subscribers in MailChimp as registered and attended for communications to your event roster. You could add registrants to a real-time roster report in Google Sheets, notify staff of new registrations in Slack. You can send custom confirmation emails to each registrant and draft invoices in QuickBooks Online for registrations that are sponsorships, all within the same integration workflow. It is hard to overemphasize how powerful this tool can be when we consider multi-app automation in Zapier. So let's go ahead and move on to our next Zap template then. So PayPal will use a similar configuration to Eventbrite, although a single Zap is all that's needed to log PayPal transactions and Bloomerang as donations. So for PayPal, the Zap starts with a trigger when a successful sale is completed in PayPal for recurring and one-time donations. And when that workflow triggers, it continues to log that transaction to Bloomerang as a donation. So we're going to go back and we're going to take a look now at our PayPal Zap. So any Zap that begins with a non-Bloomerang trigger will likely include this same Find or Create Constituent action, and this Zap is no different. We need to search for an existing constituent based on the information provided for the successful sale in PayPal, or create a new constituent if an existing one can't be found. And so this step operates the same way as we just showcased for Eventbrite. And similar to how we saw on Eventbrite, when you use the template launched in Zapier, you can see that it automatically maps the corresponding fields from our PayPal trigger. So from our successful sale in PayPal, it goes ahead and maps that data not only to the search steps, but also it'll map it to the steps where we would create a new account. And again, you can pull in additional data other than the basic fields that's mapped if you want to pull additional data from the purchaser's record in PayPal. Now, once the workflow finds or creates a constituent, it's going to create a donation on that constituent's profile in Bloomerang. Now, again, it's going to go ahead and pull that ID number from our find or create constituent steps. So it's mapping the donation to the appropriate constituent's timeline. And then there is an optional step that's in here as well that's included in the PayPal workflow, which is the update constituent action. So the update constituent action, you may want to include that optionally if you want to update the contact information of an existing constituent. Again, when using the update constituent action, you always want to be careful as this can overwrite data that's already in Bloomerang. But if you want to make sure that the contact information that's captured through a PayPal successful sale also updates that constituent's profile in Bloomerang, go ahead and continue using this update constituent action. If it's not needed, you can click these three little dots and click delete to delete that action step. Now, when we're talking about the benefits of an integration with PayPal, number one is that it's reducing data entry. You're not having to manually enter transactions from PayPal into Bloomerang or perform an import. And if PayPal has item level data that maps to specific Bloomerang funds, campaigns, or appeals, or even custom fields, you can set up item level tracking for that and dynamic coding for those fields. You can scale your online payment options and even use PayPal to sell e-commerce products and diversify giving options. So it's an expansive workflow that allows you to expand your automation and have it work for your organization. Now, I know we've only got about 4 or 5 minutes left here, so let's dive straight into G Suite. So G Suite and Office 365 are some of the most popular software suites out there. That status means they are well represented in Zapier's app directory, everything from Google Forms and Google Tasks and Calendars to Excel, Office 365 email, and Microsoft Teams. So we're going to explore a Zap that includes 2 G Suite apps, Gmail and Google Sheets. Now, the templates we're going to review today for G Suite are synonymous with integrations and Zaps you can build for Office 365 and Outlook and Excel. So just know that although we're showcasing these for G Suite, similar workflows could be created for Microsoft Office products as well. Now, when you operate a large team and many individuals are entering information into Bloomerang, it's helpful to be notified when items entered in Bloomerang require follow-up action among the team, or the team simply needs to be kept in the loop. So we explored Slack integration earlier, but email notifications are equally powerful. So the Zap we're going to showcase now is a merge of 2 Zap templates that illustrates the scalability of Zapier to handle multi-step and multi-app workflows. Let's go ahead and hop over to Zapier. And so from the new transaction trigger in Bloomerang, we're going to complete 2 actions. First, we're going to send an email in Gmail that includes the information about the donation. This could be an email to yourself from your own account or an email to someone else in your organization. We can customize every detail of the email, including what goes in the body. We'll map in data from the Bloomerang trigger to round out the message body and even create the URL link for the recipient to be able to open the transaction in Bloomerang directly from the email. Now you can see this body content right here. This is pre-populated from the template available for Bloomerang and Gmail. So I didn't have to create any of this mapping. It's already in here, as well as creating the URL that when it comes through in an email, I can click to go view that transaction directly. Now, at the same time, in addition to sending an email, we might want to populate that transaction into a spreadsheet. The columns of the spreadsheet get pulled into a Google Sheet action to create a new spreadsheet row. And we can simply map the data. So you can see I've selected my sheet in my worksheet. And then all of my different columns show up as different fields. and I can map this information directly from my trigger directly in here, again, similar to a mail merge. Account name. There we go. So you can map your fields in so that in addition to sending an email, it'll add that transaction to a Google Sheet. We can then use that sheet to create a real-time dashboard, share the sheet with non-Bloomerang users to use as an information lookup, or populate it for import into another software that doesn't have a Zapier app. Now, we do have upcoming webinars, not next week, but the following, showcasing what you can do with Google Sheets and Zapier with Bloomerang. So if that's of interest to you, I highly recommend tuning into those Academy webinars. So benefits of G Suite: sending updates without running reports, building spreadsheets, dynamic lists, sending notifications and reminders of prompting to-dos. There's lots of benefits and automation that you can do with G Suite products. There are a lot of other apps that can be integrated with Bloomerang and Zapier. Again, if you are curious if one of the apps your organization is using is available on Zapier, go to zapier.com/apps and look at their directory to see if it's available. Now, integrations for Bloomerang aren't limited to just Bloomerang and other applications. They can also be automations within Bloomerang itself. So examples of Bloomerang to Bloomerang integrations could be that if a donor gives over a cumulative amount this year, we're going to tag their account with a constituent custom field for our giving circle. Or when new donors are added to our Bloomerang database, we're going to send a personal email and log an interaction for that email to that constituent's timeline. So Bloomerang to Bloomerang workflows are an exciting opportunity to have technology do the work that would normally be assigned to data entry staff or volunteers, or even to streamline your own day-to-day tasks in Bloomerang. Now, when it comes to getting started with Bloomerang automations, step 1, sign up for Zapier. Steps 2 and 3, connect to your apps that you're using. So connect Bloomerang, connect any other apps you're using. Step 4, select one of those Bloomerang Zap templates to get started and get comfortable with Zapier. And then turn your Zap on and monitor it. Give yourself a high five when it runs successfully and build confidence in resolving errors if something doesn't go as planned. So to wrap up today's presentation, I want to leave you with a way to think about your technology stack, fundraising strategy, and how Bloomerang fits into that. So we see Bloomerang as your central database of record. It's the hub and the wheel. And as you add more apps and other software to your technology ecosystem and fundraising strategy, Bloomerang should hold the central spot. Data will flow into Bloomerang and out of Bloomerang to support your overall fundraising strategy. And when you begin to develop integrations for Bloomerang, remember this image as it'll help you maintain a tight network of system automation around your Bloomerang database. So I appreciate everyone hopping on here today. As a reminder, my name is Jessie Gilchrist. My email is here if you have follow-up questions. If you'd like to work with a consultant to set up Zaps or develop a custom Bloomerang integration to address a unique use case, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm going to hand it off to Diana for a quick poll before we open up for any final questions. I'm happy to stick around for a few minutes if anybody does have questions that have come up.
Thank you so much, Jessie. That was a lot of wonderful information. Bloomerang, we ourselves use Zapier for some of our automations as well. So we're a fan of automation because it just makes work so much easier if you can automate a lot of your tasks. So if you'd like a follow-up with a consultant to set up Zaps or develop a custom Bloomerang integration, please let us know. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, this kicks off a series of webinars that we have talking about how you can use Zapier to connect your Bloomerang database with a bunch of other different apps as well. So keep an eye out for those if you're interested, or if you're using specific apps that you would like to see how they're connected with Bloomerang, keep an eye out for those. And if you have additional questions, just let us know. Thank you so much for spending part of your afternoon with us. And thank you again, Jessie, for being with us today. And we hope we see you all in another Academy class soon. Have a great day. Bye.